sleeping with us.
Yeah.
I woke up at about 7 o'clock and I was amazed. I was like, it's really dark for 7 o'clock. So normally it's a little bit light. I mean, it's not super light. But I was like, wow, yeah, it's very dark.
I thought it was quite pleasant outside. It was very happy feel, warm weather. Like, to me, this felt like a nice November rainy day. Like it just
All right. We should probably get started here. We're going to finish up chapter 6 today, and hopefully you guys were able to kind of look through some more of chapter 6, and we can talk about confession a little bit more. We'll really slow down today and make this whatever we want it to be. So I have a couple things in mind, but if we want to discuss a little bit slower or whatever we want to do, we're just going to use this class for that. So we're in chapter 6 of the Peacemaker. Somebody tell me something, a big idea that we've come across in this material so far.
conflict can be an opportunity for us to glorify God.
Conflicts can be an opportunity to glorify God. Good.
Conflict solution is a process that we never ever considered until we did the study.
Okay, good. So conflict resolution is a process that we typically don't think through. We don't really consider that closely, right? Good, yeah. Yeah, I will say until I went through this material, I hadn't realized how many passages in the New Testament really were oriented around conflict, and how many little nuggets of wisdom there were in that. Anything else? Yeah.
It kind of did go on to the front part of Alan's comment is that conflict is not the enemy.
Good, yeah. So we kind of talked about how if God is sovereign and he allows conflict to happen, then we have to ask the question, why would God allow all this conflict? And part of it is to redeem it for his purposes, to repurpose conflict to where, hey, this is an opportunity, a unique opportunity to actually glorify God. When everything's going smoothly, yeah, there's not a whole lot of opportunity to be bright shining, right? When everybody's happy and everybody's getting along. But whenever there's conflict, then how we respond to that really shines one way or the other, right? And then we can glorify God, and that's an opportunity also to grow. Conflict often points out our character flaws if we let it, right? If we open ourselves up and be transparent and a little vulnerable and say, okay, clearly there's a conflict here. I need to see if I have any logs that cause this conflict, right? Good. Jen?
You covered one of them, but I was just thinking if we, like in the dental field, they talk about pre-medicating for some procedures. If we pre-medicate with first the gratitude for God daily for helping me every day with grace, preloaded, that he has that ready for me in the morning. And then to have an opportunity to cleanse my own heart with his help before I approach another person, which is not usually the way I would go about handling a conflict. I would either run or I would think this is all you, and kind of direct all the energy at the other person. But there's a lot of work that happens inside first if we do it God's way.
Yes, yeah, and actually a beautiful thing if you do it God's way, right? I'm reminded of the author when he brought a friend to church with him and was mortified when the pastor gets up and starts confessing and repenting of sin. He's like, oh great, now this visitor with me thinks that, you know, my pastor is this sinner. And she walked away with so much respect, and she wanted to come back because of the respect that she had. So it just, all the way around, we as humans approach it so wrong. And when we actually confess and actually repent, and we're free, we do that freely because God's grace is free, then it's just much more beautiful, much more God honoring and God glorifying. Okay, good review. We've got a slide up.
It's only back here.
If you guys want to look back there, no. So, not a big deal. It's not that important of a slide. I just was going to use it to walk through the 7 A's of confession. Okay, so we've talked about confession and the importance of Proverbs 28:13. He who conceals his sins does not prosper, but whoever confesses and renounces them finds mercy. Okay. What stood out to you? Anybody have anything from this chapter before we start talking about the 7 A's of confession individually? Anybody have anything that stood out to you that you want to discuss? Okay. All right. So he talks about the 7 A's of confession. So let's kind of step through these. Is this biblical? Do you think this is wise? And can you think of if it is biblical and wise? Maybe let's get behind some of the principles here. So he said one of the things when you confess, you need to address everyone involved. What do you think that's correct? Do you think that's a good thing, and why, or why not?
Sometimes when we've got conflict, we don't, even if we stop to deal with that conflict, we don't think about everybody around the room. And a lot of things that Aaron and I've gone through, we've talked about collateral damage.
Yes.
And there are a lot of people that are collateral damage that need to be approached to make things right. And that's hard. If I'm going to admit I did something wrong, I think about it if I'm out of turn with Aaron and I haven't dealt right, but the kids are right there. I need to go to my kids because I've set an example for them, I've affected them, and so I need to make sure that I finish that path. Whatever path I went that way on, whoever was along the way, they need to be met the same way.
Right, yeah. So you set a poor example, and it's important to clarify that that was a poor example. And that the better example is confessing those sins, right? Good. Yeah, Mike.
That makes it a lot more sincere to do that. You're not just dealing with that, you're dealing with everybody involved there. You're showing that you really mean what you're confessing, what you're talking about, because sometimes you don't consider the consequences of somebody you would never dream that was hurt by something.
Good, yeah. Good.
Something else too, like for instance in the workplace, if you single out people, then it takes the teamwork aspect out of it. So you have to make sure that you're addressing everybody as a group. If people are clocking in late, and maybe one or two people, but you want to make sure you address them as a group because you don't want somebody to feel isolated.
Good, yeah. Yeah.
I think you're probably with April's scenario, which all of us have had that scenario. If we don't tell our kids, or that's how you teach them. You're missing missing an opportunity to teach them if you don't do it that way.
Right. Yes. You're missing an opportunity to give them a principle that they need to take on. Good.
It's also showing a sense of humility and being humble about it. if you were the one who is doing the confessing and sharing this with the group.
Yes.
Because then they realize that, yeah, you're just as faulted as I am, you know, the other person that in the group. It's not just everybody pointing the finger at one person. No, they recognize that they're at fault just like anybody else is at fault.
Yep, good. Micah?
Well, April used the word path, and that just makes me think of like a hurricane or a tornado. And so you think about like the path that would take, and you've seen like tornadoes that have destroyed entire cities. And you think if you were only worried about getting your house rebuilt, and so now your house is beautiful in the midst of all this destruction, and that's kind of what we're doing. If you only go to one person and not the group that was involved. But then the flip can also be true if it is between you and one other person, and you feel confident that no one else heard, and you ask that person, do you feel like anyone else knows about this conflict, and they say no, then there's no need to get other people involved.
Right, yeah, good. Yeah, Tim.
Not too long ago, I spilled a half gallon of paint in a knee-jerk reaction, and I tried to clean up the immediate mess, but for a few days, I found additional mess in other places that I had no idea about. From shoes to clothing to other places in the garage, the driveway, tools. But collateral damage doesn't necessarily always show up in the immediate and first attempt to resolve. So you might have to keep your antenna up for a while, watching and remembering and still thinking things over, because depending on the scale of what happened, you may not see everything on your first attempt to reconcile or make right.
Good, yeah. Yeah, and you think about what heart attitude is at play that would allow you or prevent you from doing that, right? So, and which is why I think it's the most important for me to confess and find mercy, and to like that. This is not a thing where I need to save face, but if your heart attitude is, look, it wasn't that bad. I don't want people to think that I'm a bad person, or that this was not that big of a deal. Okay, you're trying to save face and you're trying to preserve that, but you're losing it as you do that, right? So instead, lay it out there. I'll give an example, a self-deprecating example here. There was one time, I think we were playing code names, and I can get pretty competitive at times, and I think Micah and I were on a team, and we had some friends over, and I gave the most amazing clue, and Micah didn't get it, and I was so incredulous, and I went way too far. And I was like, I cannot believe, and I was angry. We should have won that game. That clue lost us the game, and it was not my fault. And so I got pretty upset about that. Ridiculous now looking back, right? But we had people there that saw me get way too animated for the situation. And so I needed to confess to all of them that the way that I responded in that moment was not right. And that kind of is a little thing, but it's also important that we take those little things and we're faithful in those as well. To say, you know what? And I think that the example that April gave about family situations, a lot of times your kids see you talk, inappropriately with your spouse. And so you have to try and pay attention to that and really come full circle and apologize to everybody for what you said to your spouse in that heated moment. Okay, so that's address everyone involved. Click, the next bullet point says, avoid if, but, and maybe. Avoid if, but, and maybes. He talked a little bit about this in the video. So why, when you're confessing, would you want to avoid if, but, or maybe?
One thing, it takes the air out of the confession because it just says you're not 100% sure that you actually caused this problem, caused this issue. It's giving you an out, which is only going to infuriate the person you're trying to solve the problem with.
Good, yeah. It's giving you an out. It's making you look a little bit less guilty to say, look, if I said something to offend you, I'm sorry. Like that, like you said, it takes the air out. It takes the punch out of your confession, and it's not really a confession. It's I want to say something here that will appease you that I really don't believe.
To make you feel better.
Yeah, good.
I feel like this is a tactic that lawyers use to a jury.
Yes.
But it is not a tactic that we use if we are being open, honest, and humble.
Right. It's a political response. Like, I don't really want to admit to anything, so I'll put if in there. And that way, I don't really have any liability because I have plausible deniability, right? I can say, look, I said if. I didn't really confess. I just said if I did something. I wasn't saying that I did something. Like, it sounds like a lawyer's argument, right? Good.
I remember the first time I heard this thought, it was a couple of years ago, and some of the teachers I work with had gone to a conference, and one of the classes they took was about taking but out of your vocabulary. And so they came back and they challenged all of us for the next week to think about how often we said but to our students. And, you know, for parents and for kids, oh my goodness, the amount of times I used but when I was telling the kids something or instructing them, and it wasn't a legitimate need. It was one of those caveats that was not necessary. And if you haven't ever done something like that, I really encourage you to take these words and think over the next week on how often we use them.
Yeah.
And to try to be more honest with ourselves and others. It hurts a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
It's painful.
It's self-preservation that puts the if, but, and maybe in there. We have that instinct to preserve ourselves and preserve our reputation. So it is really hard to do a confession without these three words. It is really hard if you actually have something to confess.
In grammar right now, I'm doing subordinating and coordinating conjunctions with Joan. And but is a subordinating conjunction. And you hear that Latin root word sub in there, it means under. It makes it less than. And so you use the word but when that other sentence that you just said is less than what you're about to say. So I'm sorry that I said that, but I was really tired. And so the way I would teach Jonah that sentence is, what's the main part of that sentence? The main part is, I was really tired. That's what I'm trying to say, and then this is the but portion of it.
Yeah,
And
it's
so that's
ancillary,
the
yeah.
subordinating part to this.
Yes, good, yeah. When you say but, whatever you say after that is actually what you want to say. I was really tired, okay? And instead of what the first part, which is what you should have said, was, I'm sorry that I said that. Period. Just end it there. That's really hard to do because it makes it sound really guilty. But that's because we are. We are guilty. We're flawed people that fall all the time. And instead, what makes us Christians is that we own that. Not that we pretend like we're not that way, but that we own it. Right? Okay. Anything else on if, but, and maybe?
It's interesting because there was a scenario this week that happened at home and had nothing to do with what I ended up having to apologize for. So Brenda's in the homeschool room, and so I'm in my office, I'm in the house, she's in the garage, the homeschool room's above it. So she's asking, could the kids figure out what they want for dinner tonight and start getting whatever meat out that needs to be thawed, right? Okay. And I said, I'm on the road at this point in time. I was supposed to be in the office, right? I was on the road because I had to get Jenna to an appointment, and we had a specific meeting place that we were getting to. Okay, so I hadn't communicated to her at all that we'd already left, and so I said, I can't. I'm gone with Jenna, and you'll have to get Tristan. And I'm doing this over, voice while I'm driving, and she's like, you didn't communicate to me that you were gone or that you were leaving, or like her timeline. She's focused on Elijah, right?
Right.
And I'm like, I'm so sorry. We had to jet because I realized what time it was. We had to get out of the house, and I was gonna follow up, but then Jenna and I got talking, and it never happened. I used "but" twice in that, and when I sent it, I wasn't thinking about that at all. But I thought about it as like, how is she gonna react to this? And then I'm like, yeah, that probably wasn't the best way of giving that explanation. She didn't take it very well, but she understood. But
yeah, good. Yeah. Yeah, I was looking through the ineffective confessions here that he has on page 128. Perhaps I was wrong. Not a whole lot of power in that. Maybe I could have tried harder. Possibly I could have waited to hear your side of the story. Like those possibly, perhaps, maybe, that's just sucking the power out of that confession, or just the ability it would have to actually bring reconciliation. I guess I was wrong when I said those things. You shouldn't have lost my temper, but I was tired. Or I shouldn't have lost my temper, but I was tired. Or I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, but you really upset me. Right? Your core sentence is, you really upset me. That's really what I'd like to say here. All right. Pretty easy rule, very difficult to actually do. So pay attention to that this next week. I'm sure you're going to have lots of confessions that you need to make. So make sure you don't use those words. All right, so the third bullet point, which is back there at least, is admit specifically. Admit specifically. What does it mean to admit specifically? Do you agree with that principle of confession, or not? And if you do, why or why not?
I really like the building block here. If we take what we discussed with idols and our unmet desires, and then on page 129 where it talks about, the example they gave was, my negative attitude led me to be critical of others and it disrupted the office. The point being to look at our attitude and our action. When we address both of those, it helps ourselves and those involved in the situation. We're being specific. The word genuine comes up a lot right now. But if I look at both of those, it's going to help me grow. The opportunity is not just with our relationship with others, but the opportunity with conflict is to check myself and look at myself. This is what I did. This is where it came from. Or this is how I was feeling. Whichever direction you come from is a great opportunity for growth. Once again, painful, but we're going to come out better on the other side.
Right. Good. Yeah. Yeah, Jesse.
This is kind of similar in my thoughts to the previous one about just kind of softening a little bit, or diluting, or abstracting.
Yes.
You're wrong, and I do think that there are times when maybe there are excuses, circumstances, yes, but I think it goes back to that principle of, why not just rather let yourself be wrong? That is the hardest thing for me to accept. And in the wake of that, all of these other truths can be unfolded. And so, yeah, maybe there's extenuating circumstances, but the truth really is, you lost your temper, or you didn't say the right thing, or something along those lines. And so, I see a lot of this as just trying to soften or save face, if you kind of mentioned before. And if the Bible is telling us to accept being wronged or not being so defensive, to like expose that wrong, be open about it so that God can be glorified.
Good, yeah. Yeah, he mentions the prodigal son's, younger son's confession here. I think that's interesting. What if the younger son had said, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you, but I was young and immature, didn't know any better. I was just following the desires, and I'm sorry. That's not as potent as, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm not worthy to be considered one of your servants. Like, you see the difference there. And specific, I've sinned against you and against heaven. That's pretty strong. And it takes a very humble heart to be able to do that. Anything else from this idea of admit specifically?
Brother, I think when you do admit specifically, it makes you stop and shows that you have thought about this and you have considered it. How many apologies do we make in passing and just kind of flip it and it just goes on, but it comes across that you're just saying that because you think you need to, not because you're being specific about what actually happened.
Yes, yeah. His confession here, he's got 3 examples. This middle one, I finally realized that I've completely failed to be the kind of husband God wants me to be. In Ephesians, he says, I should love you as Christ loved his church, but I haven't even come close to living up to that standard. That's a humble heart that can say that, right? And I would say even go further and say, I failed to do this, I failed to do that, I failed to take care of this problem, I've injured you in this way and that way and that. And that kind of leads us into the next one, acknowledge the hurt. So if we're going to admit specifically, then the next thing that we can tack onto that is acknowledging the hurt. What is the idea behind that? You feel like that is something that helps you with your confession? Is that an integral part of the confession? Why or why not? Acknowledge the hurt.
If you put something under the rug and pretend it's not there, it's not going to make the relationship better. Just going to make it fester and eventually maybe not even exist. So you need to understand where they're coming from and that, yeah, there's an impact to what has been said or done that might cause some further ramifications if you don't properly address it in their aspect, through their eyes.
It validates what they're feeling and the hurt that you've caused. And I think that's a huge step in forgiveness being granted.
Yes.
That you specifically say, I see how this is affecting you.
Yes. Yeah, some of these, like, this is one where it's not necessarily something that I need to do for God or something that I need to do for myself, but rather something that I need to do for the other person. And that is help them to feel understood and heard and empathized with, right? So if I say something or do something that damages you, for me to say, here's what that did to you. I embarrassed you when I flew off the handle about that stupid game. That I embarrassed you. I looked like an idiot and an imbecile and a fool when I said that. And that made you feel very awkward and uncomfortable in that moment. That acknowledges, that's for them. You didn't need to say that necessarily. You really have to be humble to say that and thoughtful to say, oh, this acknowledges the hurt for you, and that helps to the healing process for the injured So anything else? Did you highlight anything on that page 130? That you want to discuss? Yeah, Jen.
Just the scripture in Philippians 2, verse 3. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests and the interests of others, and have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. And then jumping down to verse 8, he humbled himself by being obedient to death on a cross. And I feel like this all just comes down to like, how willing am I to recognize that Satan loves when we have conflict and loves when I preserve myself. But Christ took this so many steps further than we'll ever have to, and he's our example. So like if someone is hurt by, they tripped on something and they actually hurt themselves, I'm going to rush to them and see how I can help. But if I'm the cause of that hurt, why is it that we want to look away and be like, you didn't really get hurt that badly? That didn't hurt that
Thing out of
badly.
the way. I hope they didn't realize that.
Right? Right. It's the total opposite of what Christ is asking us to be like, and we just like to look away because then we won't have to think about what we've done.
Yeah. Don't you think this is part of taking up your cross daily? It's a cross that we actually deserve to be on. Like, we caused this injury. Certainly I can take up my cross and admit I deserve to be crucified in this moment, figuratively speaking. I deserve the guilty verdict here. Good. All right. Speaking of what you deserve, accept the consequences is the next principle behind confession. Do you feel like it is true that part of your confession you should accept the consequences of your actions?
Try to start teaching that at a young age. Everything has consequences, whether they be positive or negative. You can try to hide from them. You can try to get out of them, but maybe that's when Alan was talking about sweeping it under the rug. Eventually that rug's gonna get too big and you're gonna trip over it. You have to accept it.
Good. Yep.
And you have to teach the accountability too. I mean, I do that every day. Again, drive. We got teenagers that may not be held accountable any other way, but you have to, you do something wrong like this. There's accountability that has to be understood there, and then accept the consequences.
Right. Good. Yeah. So then again, he goes back to the prodigal son. He said, I'm no longer, he had decided to say, he'd actually get this out because his father was so eager to forgive him. But he said, he had decided to say, I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. So in that, he's accepting the consequences of his actions. His actions have made him to where he doesn't deserve to be called a son. He hasn't walked in a manner worthy of the blessings of being the son of his father. So he's saying, I accept those consequences. Make me like one of your hired men, right? So he was, I think, setting a good example there of a biblical, godly confession, saying, this is what I deserve. Yeah.
Don't you think, Brad, that this is probably one of the biggest reasons why we don't confess? Because we don't want to deal with consequences.
Yes. Yeah. It goes back to the godly sorrow versus worldly sorrow. Worldly sorrow is sorry you got caught and then you're going to have to deal with the consequences. Godly sorrow is sorry you got caught, sorry you did that thing to God. Just like you would feel if you had done something to your child, you would be like, oh, I'm so sorry I broke my word to you. And also this idea of, so I've got to accept the consequences. I will do whatever is necessary to repair this situation. It reminds me of, David being confronted. You've given the enemies of God great occasion to blaspheme. Right? Romans 2, I think. You call yourself a teacher of the law. Have you been obeying the law? And he ends up and he says, you've given the Gentiles a lot of reason to blaspheme God. Okay, number 6, step 6 of the 7 A's of confession is alter your behavior. So again, all this is great if you don't do anything differently, right? So certainly we can agree that changing your behavior, altering your behavior, is a biblical part of confessing you're wrong, right? We call that repentance. We turn and we do something else. So then I'm gonna embrace that one and move on to the last one, and then we'll allow maybe a minute or two for discussion here. Ask for forgiveness and then allow time. So the seventh A of confession that he has here, again, he's an engineer and a lawyer, so he's gonna list things out, is to ask for forgiveness, right? So, and then allow time for some reconciliation and forgiveness, right? Allow time for that healing. Any thoughts that you have on asking forgiveness? Anything you highlighted or stood out to you on page 132 and 133? Yeah.
The part where it says that time alone will not always bring forgiveness. Sometimes forgiveness is inhibited because confession was inadequate. Man, that's hard, right? Because that means I gotta go back and look and see, like, look at the heart again, be like, what did I really say? And what did I really mean? And maybe it's time to go back with humility and just be like, I just want to make sure that I've covered all of the points that you needed me to cover, and open that conversation up again, because that's not fun either.
Right, yeah. There's guys, my dad was a teacher for 42 years, and he would catch kids in a fight, 2 boys in a fight. He would send them to detention, and then they would sit together at detention. They had already been reconciled. Because guys, typically their reconciliation process looks something like, we good? Right? That is the confession, admitted. That's all of the 7 A's in 2 words, we good. That's very quick, but that doesn't really work very much unless you're a teenager and in detention. Just allowing that time and making sure that you've actually confessed and actually repented of those things. Okay, so a couple minutes left here. Does anybody? I didn't allow enough time, but does anybody have anything that you want to throw out for discussion? Anything else?
I'm glad at the end he said, be careful that this can become a checklist.
Yes.
Because that's where I tend to go is, okay, how do I get through this as quickly as possible? Oh, now there's a 7th step. I can just check all these off.
Right.
And then I get to 7 and ask for forgiveness and allow time. No, because I've checked all the 6 boxes before. That says that we're good.
Yeah.
And that's where just knowing myself, I have to be cautious in that.
Yes. Yeah, I like that he said that there have been times where he's done this, and then his wife looked at him and said, that didn't feel very sincere, right? And he had to start all over because no, it wasn't very sincere. It was mechanical. He was just trying to move past the process so that things could go back to normal. And that's not fair, right? That's not accepting the consequences of your sin and your action, your selfishness, your pride. You're just wanting to move on. And I'm sorry, that usually doesn't work. In fact, I was just thinking of the major confessions or major conflicts that Mike and I have counseled people on. One of the things that is a common theme is this person they want the, hey, are we good? And the offended party is like, no, I can't go on acting like you didn't say the things that you said. Some friends of ours, when they were dating, the mom did not want that relationship to happen in a big way, to the point where she prayed with them that this relationship would end, that they would break up, and that they would never see each other again. And then there was really no confession, no repentance, none of that. None of these things none of these principles were followed. Instead, she just wanted things to go on like normal. And this, of course, the guy is like, all right, we're good. But the girl in this relationship, like, how can I just magically continue and go forward with a happy and healthy relationship with you when you haven't acknowledged that what you did hurt me? You haven't admitted specifically what you did was wrong. Really, all you did was say, look, I want to move forward here. That's not a confession. That is the biggest saving face and biggest prideful unadmission of sin that you can have is, look, can we just move forward? Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you? That'd be really easy for you. But I'm over here hurting, and I've got deep wounds that need to be healed, right? So, I have this one. When I took the position that I'm in, I had to fill several empty slots, and one of them there were 26 people that applied for this position, and one of them was somebody that's already on my team, and this would have been a promotion for her, okay? So we ranked all the resumes, and she did not make the top 15. And so she didn't get selected. I called her and said, hey, just to let you know, we selected somebody else, and I'll just constructively say, you're a great employee. I rated you as high as I could on all the things. We also ranked people on their education, and if they have a certification. So if you have a master's degree, you get a certain amount of points. If you have your CPA license, you get a certain amount of points. And you don't have either of those things. And so while in practice, your experience, and I rated you very high, and we all did, you didn't get any points for education, and other people had lots of good experience and education. So just letting you know if you want to get selected next time. Well, that has not gone over as well as I hoped that it would. And talk to me afterward. What can I do? Do I need to confess something? Obviously, I've just given you the extreme cliff notes there, but that was one of the things that I currently am going through and trying to reconcile. So thank you for the discussion today. We'll pick up on chapter 7 next week.